Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Friday night in Ghost Stories by the Campfire. Well, Fireside. I hope everyone's had a wonderful week so far. It is spooky season. October is upon us as of last week. And it's only a matter of time before Halloween shall be darkening our doorstep with wonderful, delightful ghosts and goblins and all the great festivities of the season. You know, according to Celtic myth and legend, this is the time of year when the veil begins to thin. The veil that separates the spirit world and the living. Well, it's the time for when those stranger things happen. Now, I'm not talking Stranger Things being like the Netflix show. Love the show, but it's the time of the weird and the unusual. You know, the days are getting longer. The shadows are stretching out, wrapping the world in their embrace just earlier and earlier, as if they're eager to bring on the night. And it's a great time for these stories which I seek to tell. But Stranger Things, let's talk about that for a minute. See, my first story is, again, it's a legend of Lacey Road. And the name of the story, which I entitled it for the writing purposes, is But It Wasn't Me. Now, what on earth could I mean by "it wasn't me"? Let's go back a few years. One of my friends, Nate, was one of the many people who stayed. We had many great times. When it comes, spend the night, play games, eat pizza, have a wonderful time in the evening. And it was on one of these nights, it was one of the first few nights that he came, we would go to Flick Video in Granite, rent some movies, rent some Nintendo games, and in this case, give me just a second. Alright. In this case, we had went, instead of renting some Nintendo games, because Nathan brought some games to play, we rented the movie Maximum Overdrive, who I know many of you are probably familiar with, and we were watching it on the old VCR. Well, here's how the story went. You see, there's actually two stories to this one story. We began watching Maximum Overdrive pretty late in the night. Mom and Pop had gone to bed. And, you know, they closed the door, so it was, as long as we were moderately quiet, we could pretty much stay up as late as we liked. So we continued to watch the movie. And about halfway through the movie, Nathan fell asleep. Now, understand, before I go any further, this is my recounting of the story. But Nathan fell asleep. I finished watching out the movie, and because he was asleep, I really didn't want to wake him up. So I got up, I turned off the TV, turned off everything, the VCR and such, and went on to bed. Now I understand my bedroom at this time was not upstairs yet. So this takes place before the hand in the window incident. What was it before? Actually, I do think it was before. Anyway, so what happened is I went on in. I let Nathan go ahead and lay there and stay on, let him sleep. And I went on in, went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, Nathan was on the bunk underneath. So I figured, hey, he woke up in the middle of the night, decided to come on, saw that everything was done, decided to come on. Now this sounds pretty normal. But here's where it gets weird. See, Nathan had a complete different story for what happened. And Nathan, talking about the story, he said that he remembered dozing off in the middle of the movie. However, when he woke up, I was laying behind him on the floor where I was watching the movie. He said I was laying on the floor to sleep. That the TV and the VCR was crackling and going crazy and things. Basically it run out with static. And he got up and cut off everything. And he said he shook me. He said the only thing he thought weird about it was that where normally I would say something. He said my eyes just popped open and I looked at him. And he said, man, I think we need to go ahead and go on to bed. And he told me, and at this point I was just listening to what he was saying, and I was like, okay. Well, he said, well, when you did this, when I asked you this, he said, you just jumped up. Just looked at me, jumped up, and turned around, walked off down the hallway, and went off into your room. He said, as I was right behind you, and you never really said anything, you never acknowledged anything, but you jumped up on the bed, and then and there was some stuff on the lower bunk, and I just kind of looked at it, and I was like, well, I just moved the stuff off and went on to bed. And when I said goodnight, he said, you didn't say anything. Well, that's weird. Because I told him, I was like, well, that's weird. That's not how it happened. And I told him like what I told you about what happened. To this day, see, I know what I saw. I know what happened. But to this day, we both share completely different stories for the same night and the same instance. Now, how did this happen? It's not unusual. See, there were also times when neighbors would tell my family that they would see me running out the road in the middle of the night. However, the house was locked and there was no way for me to get out of the house. So, there were some weird things that went on with that. I know years later somebody caught a picture in my house with a Polaroid. And there was a figure in that Polaroid. And it was in there by that old stove that I mentioned last week about the head in the window, the old stove in the dining room. It was still sitting there, and in that picture, you could see that figure on the inside of the house, standing by the old stove and looking at it. It had a cloak, but when they blew it up under when they blew it up under a magnifier, it bore the same shape in the lower face as mine. Now, I don't know what to say about that. It was kind of weird because I was nowhere in the vicinity. Matter of fact, I was trying to deal with growing up and having a family at the time. So, and the picture was so bizarre that my spouse at the time actually was so freaked out about it, she burnt the picture, which kind of killed the evidence that of this being there. But oh well, these things happen, I guess. But that was my first story. Now my second story is also a legend of Lacey Road. It's called I'd Better Go. You see, my cousin Charles loved to come spend the weekends, the weeks, and the summers with us at times. And this happens to be one of those summertime visits. He would come. Now, to give you a backstory on this, Charles would come. He would do some minute chores around the house, mow the yard, and maybe a little cleaning and stuff like that. Not much, but just a few little odds and ends. And then would take the time to go fishing and stuff like that. Or if it was in the autumn, he'd go hunting down the woods a little bit. This is, in the area where Pop could give him permission to go hunting and things. And this was before the game club took over, so what would happen is he had started seeing somebody down the road from where I live. Well, in one of the incidents when he was there, he was talking on the phone to her. And as they were talking, at this time I was out with my friends riding bikes up and down Lacey Road. Up and down the road, riding bikes, doing what little boys do, and just having fun, living life. Wasn't thinking about anything weird happening during the day. To be honest with you, I probably wasn't even thinking about anything weird happening at all at this point, but either way, nobody was home. It was just me and Charles. I was out riding my bike. Charles was in the living room at the base of the stairs talking to his girlfriend on the phone. Well, as he was sitting there, broad daylight, something opened the front door and walked in. It walked in, it walked right by him, walked down the darkened hallway that was stood between the staircase and the dining room, opened the back door and walked right out the back door. Now, what was it that he saw doing it? That was the problem. He didn't see anything. The door opened. It walked past him, went down the hall and out the back door. And yet he never saw a thing, even though it was broad daylight. So as that happened, he looked at his girlfriend, looked at the phone, and kind of spoke to his girlfriend in kind of a what just happened voice, and said, I better go. I'm going to get off here. I'll come down. And with that, he hung up. He got up, went out into the summer day, saw me riding my bike, and said, "What's up?" And that was I'd Better Go. So it was just one of those strange events. You always hear ghost stories taking place at night. Well, this happened straight during the day. That's a stranger thing that could happen. And has happened. Speaking of stranger things, and stranger things happening, the next story comes from our favorite scary stories to tell in the dark and folklore. You see, there was a boy in a village, and he was working out in the field, and he looked up, and there at the edge of the field, he saw Death. And Death wasn't kind of taken aback, looked at him and beckoned to him. And the boy looked, his eyes got real huge. And as soon as he saw it, he turned, run, went back to the home, and he told his father, he says, Dad, I gotta go, I can't stay here anymore. I've got to move to the city and go to the city to get away, because Death was out in the field when I was working out there, and he was calling to me. I've got to go. I can't stay. And he said, oh, calm down. Tell me again. Whoa, what's going on? He said, Dad, I was working in the field, and I looked up, and he took a couple breaths. Says, Death himself was standing at the edge of the field. And he was watching me. And when he saw me look up, he beckoned to me. And he said, I knew it was my time. I can't stay here. I gotta go so Death doesn't come for me here. And he's like, okay, son, fine. Whatever it is you need to do, go ahead and do it. I'll go see what is going on. Well, his father, the boy got packed up, got his stuff in the vehicle, and went on down the road toward the city. Meanwhile, his father had to figure out why his son was so shook up and wondering about Death and everything. Just like, okay, I'm going to see what's going on. So he went out to the field. And as he went out to the field, he saw Death standing there. So wanting to get to the bottom of what was going on, the father walked up and said, I see you here. Well, what are you doing? You scared my son. He was terribly frightened when I spoke with him. And Death looked at him and said, to the father, and said, Father, said, it's okay. I was just confused. See, I saw your son here, and I wasn't meaning to see him here because I've got an appointment with him in the city this afternoon. Now, if you take this story the way Alvin Schwartz wrote it for the scary stories, I spun a little variation on it, but it's actually based on a much older tale coming from the Middle East. And in that older tale, Death is a woman and takes a feminine shape. So it's a much older tale, and has changed many times. It's just been passed over the years. And so, well, let's see. Do I have another story for you? Just one of those weird things that happen. You know, I love telling these ghost stories. I love writing my Legends of Lacey Road, and I love the town of Whispery Hollow. These are fun things that I like to do year round. And of course, these ghost stories is the first time I've done this year. So, if you've actually been enjoying this series of ghost stories, let me know. Drop me a comment below. Let me know. That way, if you're enjoying it, I can continue to do this. Yes, it'll be only through September and October And, this will also be coupled with my Legends of Lacey Road, which I have got to finish a couple of stories and get them up because I am actually running behind. I just had some other matters that's come up and had to attend. But yeah, if you really enjoy these stories, if you're enjoying hearing me tell these tales, and it's been an adjustment, but I'm getting more comfortable with it. And sometimes it just takes practice. So, if you're enjoying these tales, like I said, just let me know. Let me know in the comments below if there's a ghost story you would like me to tell. Put it in the comments below. I will look it up and I will do my best to recount and retell that ghost story. And especially if it's an old favorite or something that you'd like to hear, I'll be glad to do so. Let's see. Now, stranger things. What other strange things can I bring up to talk about? Here's one of the strangest things I can tell you about my old road. Growing up, being in that old house. This house that inspired the Legends of Lacey Road, which are the true ghost stories of that house. Like I said, if you read my blog page, which will soon be moved over to my new website, which I've got to get completed and get published and up and running. But if you look at the stories around the old house of Legends of Lacey Road, the old house had a way of finding your weakness. Whatever dwelt in that house had a way of finding your weakness, what terrified you most. And it would play on that fear. You see, when I was a small child, probably between 7 and 9. Now, understand, I'm going to relate something from another time period. So what I'm going to mention, was it very much acceptable then? It's not as much now. It's sad because there's that much lack of responsibility, but that's a whole other story. But the point is, at this time, it was acceptable. But there were many times when I was younger, I liked to stay home by myself when my family would go to visit their friends. And sometimes I would be there by myself in the evening, and it would get dark. Now, at this same time, there was this fear I had of the dark because, let's just say, I had recurring nightmares, especially after my dearly beloved sister-in-law at this time overly exaggerated Nightmare on Elm Street, and my imagination did more with her description of Freddy Krueger than seeing the movie ever bothered me. Matter of fact, Freddy Krueger doesn't even faze me anymore. But at the time, my imagination between the trailers and her description of the movie and how bad she really made the movie, if the movie would have been as bad as what she was making it, would have been a real horror movie. But anyway, but no, it was, but because of these matters, I had an issue with the dark for a while. That was my weakness for a long time. Yes, me who loves being in the darkness, loves being in the shadows, loves being out at night, and who is essentially a night owl and loves to sit out under the moon and stars. I was terrified of the dark for a long time, for several years actually. But the house knew it, or whatever was in that house knew it. You see, it would never fail. Each and every time I was home alone and Mom and Pop were gone for a good couple of hours, it never failed that the power would go off. And I'm sorry, I just got chills over me thinking about that. But it never failed. As soon as it got dark, the power would go off. And I would be left in the house by myself in the dark. Never failed. Now, nothing that I know of ever happened. But like I said, thinking about right now, my skin is absolutely crawling from remembering this. But yeah, every time I was home by myself, the shadows would creep on, everything would be fine, TV would be going good. Then as soon as it got dark, the lights go off. All the power in the house would go off. Other weird part was it always came back on right around the time Mom and Pop were coming home. Never failed. Those were some eerie days. Now, I did get over my fear of the dark, thanks to, and dealt with the whole deal with Frady. And when I actually did watch Nightmare on Elm Street, I asked myself what I was so afraid of. It was, like I said, over-exaggeration, and someone that already had a very, very good imagination. And it did a lot more horror in her description than the movie ever could in its showing. But the other stuff I'm telling you, there's no imagination there. You can't imagine the power going off, but you can imagine the fear that comes with it. Well, I've hoped you enjoyed these tales this week. This week of Stranger Things. And I say this, not in any way trying to address the Netflix movie, but in the whole quote, stranger things have happened. And in these tales you can recount, stranger things have indeed happened. I hope everyone has a wonderful night, a wonderful weekend, and I hope to see you again next week for the next installment of Live Ghost Stories by the Fireside. Have a good evening. Be safe.